Hello to all my brilliant English students in Year 7. It's Mr. Scott Evans here with another lesson. This one's about reading poetry, although you can't see that title very well because my head's in the way. That's what it says, reading poetry. And we're going to be continuing to look at the poem that you've been working on this week by Roger Robinson, And If I Speak of Paradise. Now, the temptation with poetry is to feel quite swamped by it. Sometimes it can seem quite daunting, a bit like an ocean, and you can be tempted to just dive straight in and grab hold of something that seems familiar. You might find a simile coming past, or there's a metaphor, and you might just grab it. Oh, there's some alliteration, grab that. Because those things are familiar, we've been taught about those things, and so we grab them. But actually, what you need to do with poetry, instead of diving straight in, is to stop and admire it and to look at it and enjoy it. Like when you go down to the beach, look at the view, take it all in, and then get in the water, swim around and see what you can find. The other thing I want to encourage you to do as we're using our poetry anthology is to enjoy it, to have a good time. Think about something you enjoy playing with, I don't know, Xbox, PlayStation, something on your phone. You don't just play with it once. You play with it again and again and again until you really master it and make the most of it. Your poetry anthology should be like that. You know how we wrote notes all over A Midsummer Night's Dream. We played with it, we looked at it, we revisited it. You need to do that even more with poetry. And the great thing is that poems are shorter, so you can really get involved in them and enjoy them. So let's look at this poem here, And If I Speak of Paradise by Roger Robinson. You should be thinking about reading that a few times over. The first time you read any poem, a bit like when you get to the beach and you stop and look at the view, you should read it once, just read it all the way through and then just stop and think, okay, what was that about? What's the message of this poem? What's the author trying to get across? Often the clue will be in the title. So this one's about paradise. What's paradise and why is he talking about it? Often poets will give you a clue in their title. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes you'll have to read it all and then think, what's that really about? And sometimes the title is only a tiny clue. Maybe it's actually talking about something a lot more than that. Do you remember the piece that we read about the sweet shop? The piece of writing wasn't really about sweets. It was really about childhood and memories and someone looking back on their childhood with some sadness, that had some things in their childhood that had not been that great. So the title can give you a clue, but really you've got to read it and then think, what's the reader trying to tell me? What's the writer trying to tell me? What's the poet trying to tell me? He or she will have a message that he's trying to get across. What's the main idea? Often I'll read poetry with a pencil in my hand and I'll read it and then I'll write down some ideas of what I think the poem is about. Then I'll read it again and I'll check whether what I think it's about is what it's really about. I'd love it if you'd start doing this with the anthology. Start going through it, reading them, having some fun with them, writing down what you think it's about, and then going back to check. In your anthology, you'll find that quite a few of the English teachers that have helped compile it have written a little introduction, and again, that can probably help you get on the right lines with what's the main idea. But try and own it for yourself as well. Read it and see what it means to you. See what the author's saying to you. So you read it once to try and see what it's about. You read it again to check. And this time, as you go through, underline every bit of evidence you find that supports your view of what you think the poem's about. You're a bit like a detective. So you've got an idea who the murderer is, and then you're going to go and look for clues. So as you read it a second time, underline things. So second time through on this poem, we might be looking to see what is there about paradise? What is there about a life after this life that's going to be perfect? What is there about things being as good as they can possibly be? Look for clues and see what you can underline. Check that you have got it right. Maybe what you thought was the main idea actually isn't the main idea. And when you go through as a detective, you actually start to spot that you weren't right in the first place. Once you've read it a couple of times, you've got to grips with what the author's trying to say to you, and you really appreciate it and you enjoy it, then you can start to dive in and start your analysis. At this point, you can start thinking about whether there is rhyming words and what difference does that make? What about the rhythm? Does it make us want to read it quickly? Does it make us want to read it slowly? What's the alliteration there for? What's the simile there for? Are there some words there that are particularly powerful? And you know those posters you stuck in your English books in one of our first lessons, all about language and structure? There may be some bits of language and structure which you can find and use your poster to think, yes, that's why the poet is using that. And then you're ready to bring it all together. What's the main idea of the poem? What's the poet trying to get across? And why has he used these language and structure techniques to try and help support his message? That's a much better way of reading a poem instead of just diving in and pulling out a bit of alliteration and start staring at that and going, oh, isn't that amazing? You'd never do that with a novel, would you? Think of a book that you've really enjoyed. Think about Lord of the Flies. You wouldn't take Lord of the Flies and just jump in, open it at some random page and pull out a bit of alliteration or a simile and say, oh, I've worked out what the whole book's about. So don't do it with a poem. Look at the whole thing, enjoy the whole thing, and then start your analysis. So here's the poem. You could pause the video now and read it again if you like. Don't forget, it's also on YouTube. I'll put the link up for you again, and you could listen to the poet reading his poem. Remember, it starts at 8 minutes. And as I said last time, you can't beat listening to the poet reading his own poem. Poems are meant to be performed. That's how you're supposed to hear them and receive them. So again, you'd never listen to a poet reading his poem and then say, hang on, stop. Did you just use a simile? Let's just stop and look at that. You'd never do that. You'd listen to the whole poem and take it all in. So, have a go with this poem today. Really get into reading it. You've read it a few times already. Let's look at it a bit more today. Go through the process that I've recommended to you. Play with it. Work out what it's about. Look for evidence and check that you're right. Then do your analysis. And then I'm going to get you to answer some questions about it today. So you're going to need your English book. You're going to put today's date and the title, A Portable Paradise. You're going to need a ruler and a pen. There's the link for the poem. I'll put that on Satchel 1 so it's really easy to click on. Then you're going to have a go at answering questions. Now you can see with each question I've put a number of marks that the question is worth. So question number 1, think about the title of the poem. What would be your idea of paradise and why? That's worth 3 marks. Now to get a mark in today's lesson, you're probably going to need to write a sentence. So for that one, to get 3 marks, you're going to need to write 3 sentences. So you might say, this is my idea of paradise. Describe that and say why that's your idea of paradise. That would be 3 sentences. You can get 3 marks. Everyone can get all 3 marks on that one because everyone's got an idea of what their paradise is. You were even thinking about that last lesson. What does portable mean? So you should know the word portable. Write about it in one sentence. You'll get 1 mark. Do you see how it works? So, I've given you a lot of questions to look at today. They're all on the sheet on Satchel 1, and I want you to answer the questions in full sentences in your book. Have a go at all the questions. There isn't a single question here that you can't do. They're all about what you think, about how you want to respond to the poem. Okay, so there's none here that you can't do, but if you're really stuck, you can ask me. Get onto Satchel 1 and ask me for some help. Alternatively, get in touch with one of your friends. You must have the contact details of one of the friends in the class. Ask them. Help each other. See if you can support each other. Like I say, if you do have any questions, you can contact me and I'll do my best to get back in touch with you and help you. I'm going to want you to hand this in today. So once you've answered the questions in your book, take a picture of it and send it to me on Satchel 1. I'll then give you a mark and a short comment to let you know what I think of your work. I'm going to finish now with another quote about poetry. Painting is silent poetry, and poetry is painting that speaks. Someone called Plutarch said that. If you've got time, why don't you look up who Plutarch was and when he was alive. Was he alive before or after Jesus? What else did he say? See what you can find out. But poetry, remember, is like a painting. It's something to be looked at and admired, to go back to it time and time again. It's a painting that speaks to us. It's something beautiful. Every word on the page has been carefully chosen. Enjoy it. Have a great time with our poem today, and I look forward to seeing what you can produce. Have a great day. See you.